All down. All silent. Going. Go. So congratulations.
Welcome to the Current Market Insights podcast, brought to you by Harris Partners Real Estate. Each episode, we chat with real estate author and industry leader Peter O'Malley to discuss the current property market conditions and provide insights to assist you on your property journey.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Current Market Insights. I'm your host, Ciaran O'Brien, and with me as always is Mr. Peter O'Malley. Peter, hello.
Ciaran, great to see you.
Great to see you for another week, my friend. We've got a big episode today, so let's just get straight into it. Since we spoke last week, the RBA met yesterday as we're recording this, and the board and the governor made their statement and made a decision on the interest rates, which I'm sure most people have heard by now. But as you always do with the statements, take our listeners through what was said and what you think the messaging kind of indicates from here for the next cycle when the RBA do meet in 6 weeks.
Yeah, thanks, Ciaran. So we got a 0.25% interest rate cut, of course, so no larger, which some people would have liked to have seen, and some will argue that could have been justified.
Yep.
But we did say last week, whatever the RBA did at this meeting, they had data to back up their decision, and they did finish their statement, which we'll pick apart quickly before moving on. But they did finish their statement by saying that today's policy decision was unanimous. That's interesting because last month when they were on hold, it was 6-3 to hold versus cut, but it was unanimous today. So
I wonder, just very quickly, whether they were unanimous to cut or whether there was unanimity around the extent of the cut. Was it unanimous? Yes, we all agree we should cut, but did they actually agree on the numbers?
Oh, it says today's policy decision was unanimous. So I think there was only two options on the table: hold or 0.25.
Yeah.
So even though we speculated, would they go higher? With a larger cut, not higher, but would they go with a larger cut last week? It was never considered looking at this, and there wasn't anything in their statement to suggest they were looking at anything other than a hold or a 0.25% cut.
Yeah.
The statement is sometimes very insightful, Ciaran, which is why we pull it apart. And then sometimes it's very bland. And I saw a lot of media commentary on this statement before I read the statement. And when I look at the statement and read it, they didn't say too much other than we're cutting interest rates by 0.25% and reiterated some of the key data points and the thinking. And the key points in the statement that they came out is that inflation rates are moderating. We're happy with that. We're on a sustainable path. Inflation has fallen substantially since the peak in 2022, as higher interest rates have been working to bring aggregate demand and potential supply closer towards balance. So that's all, pretty straightforward stuff. One of the journalists did pick this up, and he was right to do so. In every statement, it feels like, maybe not, but it feels like every statement for the last 6 meetings has highlighted the risks in the global economy, in financial markets, and the RBA's preparedness to stand behind and support the Australian economy and Australian jobs if they need to.
Yeah.
And it's in this one again. Yeah. And it was David Taylor, the fellow from the ABC, who wrote along the lines on Twitter that it's pretty obvious the RBA look like they are preparing for a global market event.
Yeah, look, I think it's probably a very astute, insider assumption. I can't help but think that all of the statements, being quite bland, I feel like they're just keeping their cards close to their chest and they're giving themselves room to make rash decisions in whatever direction they need to in the event something happens. I mean, they've been proselytizing that the global economy is in strife for a long time, with all the things that have been happening, wars and government changes and all those kinds of things. But I do wonder whether they're just hedging their bets to try and avoid the level of scrutiny or disdain that can come with making an unpopular decision.
I think they're capable of unpopular decisions. Their statements are normally bland, but you can sort of read between the lines to juice it up a bit. But this one, as I say, was particularly bland. They went on to say, with underlying inflation continuing to decline back towards the midpoint of the 2 to 3% range and labour market conditions easing slightly as expected, the board judged that a further easing of monetary policy was appropriate. This takes the decline in the cash rate since the beginning of the year in 2025 to 75 basis points. The board nevertheless remains cautious about the outlook, particularly given the heightened level of uncertainty about both aggregate demand and potential supply. It noted that monetary policy is well placed to respond decisively to international developments if they were to have material implications for activity and inflation in Australia. So it's saying it'll act further if it has to, but it's by no means promising more rate cuts in that statement. What does that mean for the property market? As we touched on last week, vendors think it means higher prices, wrongly or rightly, and they very much welcomed the news. Buyers are not so impacted by interest rate cuts, although there will be an element of buyer who says rate cuts will be good for the property market, so I'd rather buy sooner rather than later. What buyers are really looking for is a broader base of supply because stock levels are very tight still.
Yeah. Look, I think that's a pretty reasonable assumption. The only other comment I'd make, the way they frame that ability to react gives me the impression they feel like they're kind of in the midpoint of where they should be. They could go a little bit lower, they could go a little bit higher, but they feel like they're, in the middle of the seesaw, and if they need to switch one way or the other, they can, which, if I'm reading between the lines, tells me that we might be at a point, an interest rate setting or a cash rate setting where they feel there's a bit of long-term stability potentially. They could adjust either way, but, we're not going to expect a 2% cut from here. We're kind of at a nice level field where things are coming down the right direction, but we could adjust either way if we need to.
Yeah, I think it was ANZ are predicting 3 more rate cuts, down to a low of 2.85 by February, March next year. Remains to be seen if that's the way it unfolds. The RBA would be very, very conscious not to front run their thinking and have expectations of further rate cuts in the system, because as we've seen at the beginning of 2023 there was this sense that the RBA were going to start cutting rates imminently. The market behaved and the economy behaved as though those rate cuts were a lock. Everyone got excited, pushed property prices up 5-10%, and then the rate cut didn't come in 2023, and there was a deflation there. So carefully managed messaging, there's no doubt.
Certainly. Look, moving on then, I know we normally spend more time on the interest rates and the RBA statement, but pretty juicy topic I want to talk about today, Peter. The overarching topic, underquoting, we have spoken about ad infinitum, and we will continue to talk about it forever, while ever it's in the industry and we have a podcast. It is a topic that our listeners are no doubt aware of if they've listened to us before. But in the last few weeks to month, we have spoken in detail about some stories coming out about a particular agent, Josh Tesolin, in Western Sydney, and some of the investigations from journalists and Fair Trading and other complaints from consumers around some of his activities. And we have said throughout all of those episodes that he is most certainly not alone in his conduct, in the way that he conducts business. Just this week, there's been a pretty major investigation come to light in the Herald. Now, I know you are intimately across this piece, but also, obviously you're a subject matter expert on, the dealing itself. So I'd love for you to talk to our listeners about, firstly, what the follow-on is from the Tesolin story in particular, but then what is the kind of broader conversation that's come out with this large-scale investigation?
Yeah, thanks, Ciaran. So look, we all woke on Saturday morning to underquoting and the agent in question on the front page of the Herald. The other thing that we have said over the last few weeks is Josh Tesolin did not deserve, nor does anybody deserve, to be trialled by media.
Yeah.
Which is what was happening.
Yeah, of course.
And intelligently or not, Josh Tesolin's only response to all of this is, I've been under investigation for 3 years. If I've done a crime, tell me what it is and I can defend myself. Yeah. But at the moment, it's all this smoke around me. My words, not his, the smoke around him. But, there's all this innuendo. But there's no charge put to me. So how can I respond to that? So on Saturday morning, we must go back. It would seem that him, whether it be my mutual decision or one party cut the cord, but Tesolin and the Ray White Network went separate ways over this issue and the coverage. Read into that what you will. And then shortly thereafter, Tesolin rebadged his business, and then within a week of the rebadged business commencing operations, he was hit with a 4-month suspension of his license.
Yep.
With further investigations to take place. Underquoting was not the only charge put to him. Dummy bidding, underquoting, high-pressure sales tactics, and this one, if found guilty of, I think will have major ramifications, and producing false documents to Fair Trading are among the allegations being levelled against one of Australia's highest-earning real estate agents.
Yeah.
So anyway, he's now got charges to defend, and if he's innocent, that'll come through. But yeah, he's unfortunately for him, wrongly or rightly, he's become the poster boy for all that is wrong with Sydney property when it is an industry-wide problem, underquoting.
Yeah. Yeah, look, we, as you say, I should have said alleged because, again, he does now have a case to answer for with Fair Trading. And I think I have to agree with you that if there is, wrongdoing is one thing, but then, perjury, not that it's perjury in this case necessarily, but, delivering false documents, lying to a court, lying to an investigation, whatever, those things do bode very poorly and certainly don't give, as reported, don't give any confidence to anyone reading that in fact he has done the right thing and maybe he's just a victim here. But maybe the first cap to fall in what could be a much larger issue. We know it's like a system-wide issue, but the Herald goes on to talk about
how broad-based
a much larger problem. So if you can, talk us through what the article kind of goes into, what the investigation itself kind of comprises of, or what it did comprise of, and what really this does mean.
So whether it be the Herald or the Department of Fair Trading or both, but it's very, very obvious based on the content in this article that agents, probably unknowingly for many of them, have been getting monitored for the last few years.
Yep.
And instead of the regulator zeroing in on isolated incidences where the agent says, I support your attempts to clean up the industry with underquoting, but the market just took hold on this one and it beat all expectations and my file's in order, have a look at it here. What they're doing is they're tracking franchises, individual agents, individual firms, and getting data sets on the price performance of those respective agents, firms and franchises over a greater period of time to see who the systemic underquoters are. And they've mentioned firms in here, and I don't want to start a war with the real estate industry or individuals. It's all there in the article online for anyone who wants to read it, but there are agents who have systematically underquoted the likely selling price of their listings, and they systematically sell for 20 to 25% more than what they've quoted the consumer. Now, that's if it's a one-off. I've had that happen in isolated instances, and that's great for us and it's great for the vendor, and we've got to say to the underbidders, we never saw that coming. So I'm not saying we've never had that happen, but what the Herald article did with all of the data is you can only blame the market once or twice before it becomes a tactic. And agents are now, even in our marketplace in the inner west, are suddenly really responsive and really compliant suddenly with the way they're managing price during their campaign. But if you read between the lines in this article in the Herald, it's too late.
It makes me wonder, we spoke about, to be honest, I can't exactly remember when the episode was, but we talked about some of the changes and how Fair Trading was starting to issue what I said on the podcast at the time, ridiculously low and pointless fines to agencies for what appeared to be cases of underquoting. I now wonder, and I'd love to get your insight on this, do you think that was a very deliberate kind of drip feed of notice to agencies to in some ways draw them off the fact that they were heavily, heavily investigating with a much more punitive action in mind? And you did say at the time, to be fair, that this will likely result in something more extreme. But I wonder whether that was a bit of a red herring. Oh, look, we might come and check on your documentation to make sure you're compliant, when in fact they were building an enormous case, which, if this data is correct, is exactly what's happened. They have built a massive data set that shows some pretty consistent, broad, like misleading conduct, which is, unfortunately confirms a lot of what consumers have said to us over the years, that how do you trust any of these agents? The pricing's terrible. It doesn't make sense. It's the whole industry is cooked.
Oh, well, it is. And we've spoken on other podcasts where if you're an honest real estate agent with a $2 million listing and two of your competitors down the road have got a competing $2 million listing, but they're quoting 1.6, you can quote an honest price of $2 million. But the reality is all the buyers who might be interested in your listing are down the road in the open houses at 1.6.
Yeah,
and that is how it's a rush to the bottom with underquoting, where the agent that goes the lowest is setting the tone for all of their competitors within that respective marketplace. So there's many agents, Ciaran, who will find themselves doing a compliant version or a non-compliant version of underquoting or pricing below expectations because they have to, because when they quoted market price, no one turned up to the inspection.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely, but I also hate that viewpoint, right, that they have to do it to be competitive, because I just think, again, that's a systemic issue.
But if the regulator didn't police the issue, this is what the agents had to do to survive, and this is what the vendors were prepared to do to sell.
Yeah.
So it's actually the side effect of no regulation or no proper oversight. This data match that we're talking about here is going to clean that up very, very quickly.
So before we actually get into a bit more of the nitty-gritty around the data itself, because I'd love to just get some rough figures, but in reality, let's say this investigation, is reported by the Herald but is going on very, very thoroughly through Fair Trading, and they decide to come out with a bunch of punitive actions here. What do you think the actual effect is? So let's say, agency X that's listed and has 45 or 50% of their properties going 30% above guide, very clear cases of underquoting. Do you think it's a scenario where Fair Trading will use financial...
I'll just answer the question, because two people within the industry that have more insight, or three people actually, who've got much more insight than me, have all said the same thing over different periods of time. So there's a real estate agent in Surrey Hills whose target market or his specialty is real estate agents.
Right.
And he has said publicly at a seminar 2 years ago, the Department of Fair Trade's investigation into real estate agents on underquoting is real, and agents are going to lose their licenses. If you're doing it, stop. And if you're not doing it, don't do it.
Yeah.
This week on a podcast, John McGrath and Tim McKibben of the New South Wales
REI,
president of the REI both said real estate agents are going to lose their licenses over this issue. And on the front page of the Saturday Herald, star agent Teflon Josh has licence suspended pending further investigations. So that is where it's going.
Do you think that will be the end of the line? And obviously you don't know the answer to this, but obviously licence cancellations, suspensions, whatever, that is the punitive action for the agent or agencies involved. But do you think there'll be any financial implications here other than loss of business as a result of losing your licence?
I think they've been handing out warnings and administrative fines.
They're the ones we've talked about before.
Yeah, which for a long time. But the blatant cases, the firms we're talking about that have miraculously, and I say that sarcastically, miraculously achieving 22.5% above the listed guide for all of their listings, or essentially all of their listings for the last 3 years, they've got major problems. And the thing is that they don't have problems that go away by doing the right thing next Saturday.
Yeah.
The digital footprint is recorded and there for all time. It's, the long hand of the law moves slowly. Justice moves slowly, but it's coming for all those home buyers that were blatantly misled into bidding at auction. And, we've spoken about it before. You were one of those.
Yeah, yeah. Through Ray White, happy to name drop, they were dreadful and refused to take accountability and, tried to put the blame on us for being unrealistic in them, all of the tactics that get used, right? Yeah. Which is, anyway, it's a sore point for me.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to bring that up for that reason, but a journalist from New Zealand Herald rang me today and saying, hey, we've got this going on in New Zealand. could you share some of your experiences with me? And we got on to talking about the auction bunny. It's like, what's the auction bunny? And the auction bunny is the bidders that have maxed out in price before the properties even hit the vendor's reserve.
Yeah.
And the reason they've maxed out on price and they're at the auction and they think they're a chance is because they've listened to the agent on the agent's price guide.
Yeah.
So to bring specificity to that, you've got an auction guide of 2.2 million. You say, hey, we could pay 2.45 for this. Count us in. But everybody in every real estate agent in the suburb knows the listing's worth 2.8, and you're bidding in good faith to 2.45 million, thinking you're a chance, and it's not even on the market, and then it eventually sells for around 2.8, and it's that stage that you work out you're a stooge, you've been played, and you are the auction bunny for the day.
Yeah, and as to anyone who hasn't listened to our episode where we actually talk about my case, that it wasn't on the market until, I think from memory, it was 48% above the guide. The guide given on the morning of the auction, 48% above that is when it finally went on the market, and it sold for over 60% above the guide, which, obviously that's an extreme case, but it certainly happens. I guess looking a little bit closer at the data itself, in terms of where the data suggests this is happening, I guess two questions. Is it happening at a particular range in the market? Is it the lower end, the higher end, the middle?
It's
as the first question.
It's right across the industry. It's right across the city. It's right across every price point.
Okay, that was my follow-up question. Is there any particular regions, is this an isolated issue to Quakers Hill and the Ray White kind of agencies out there, or are we seeing this all across Sydney?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so it's they talk about in the article.
Can I tell you why? Because they all go to the same training.
We're not going to name that training, but they all go.
Let's not forget, for our listeners, consumers out there, this is the industry that rushed to the Gold Coast 5 years ago to pay $1,500 a ticket to listen to the Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belford.
Yeah.
And who was there? It was sub 35-year-olds with short pants and no socks.
Yeah.
If you get the idea.
Yeah.
Sitting in the front row taking notes from the Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah.
That is the real estate industry.
Yeah. It's I think it's unfortunate that sales in general, right? That's now kind of portrayed as the way to succeed, is that slightly manipulative, slick, maximize opportunity kind of process, as opposed to matching people with solutions, Yeah. Anyway. Look, again, super interesting topic, Peter. We say this every time. I really hope there is some major change that comes out of this. I remember, all my time working with you in real estate, I always had that kind of lingering feeling in the back of my head that I was unanimously hated by everyone who knew me, just by virtue of the industry that I'm in. And I always felt that was unfair because I'm an honest, kind of honourable guy, and we are surrounded.
I told you
here.
to stop wearing paisley ties.
Well, you got to put on what makes you look young and fresh, Peter. But there was always that niggling thing, right? That it really is, consistently rated as one of the least trustworthy industries, and this data supports that. That's probably with good reason. I really do hope that there is some massive punitive damage here, and people realise that you just can't do this.
So, in closing, Ciaran, in the podcast that we were listening to between John McGrath, Tim McKibben and Tom Panos, they were interviewing, John and Tom were interviewing Tim McKibben, and they were asking him questions. And Tim said, let me ask you a question. Does underquoting get higher prices?
No.
Not a bad question.
Yeah.
Yeah? And John and Tom both gave their answers, which were versions of no. But that's the wrong question. The question is, why do real estate agents underquote?
Well, I think because it gets more people there to push the price.
Because it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you have an auction with one buyer? You can't underquote. How do you have an auction now that dummy bidding has been stamped out and no one wants to take the risk to do that? You underquote.
Yeah.
How do you create a frenzy? Well, occasionally, as you would know from your time in real estate sales, the odd listing and in the odd market environment naturally creates frenzies. But by and large, it's about bringing a buyer and a seller together, yeah?
Yeah.
So how do you create frenzies week in, week out?
Well, you make it seem too good to be true.
You underquote.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's when the consumer understands that. Why do real estate agents underquote? Because the tactic works. It might be non-compliant. It might be a dirty, low-rank sales tactics. But the reality is that's why they're doing it. The consumer becomes a little bit wiser about how to play the situation.
Yeah. Yeah. As a final point before we move on to our final piece today, Peter, I still love, and I must remind our listeners, the digital footprint you talk about. If you have ever followed a property on domain, you still get those price updates, whether the agent changes them or not, whether they, follow compliant procedure, whatever. There is a digital footprint. I have some on my phone still going back 5-6 years where every price change is there. And if it wasn't changed and then sold for a ridiculous, like underquote to over achievement price, it's all there for them to find. So I suspect this is going to, this might be the first 18 months of data, but there is a lot more to collect, I think.
Yeah. Now, to keep the consumer balanced on this issue, if you engage in a property and you are outbid above the reserve, you haven't been underquoted. Yeah. You've been outbid by a buyer who wants it more or can pay more.
Yeah.
But if you are the auction bunny, where you, in good faith, have followed the agent's price guide, the agent's clearly got sufficient interest in the property to have a strong sale, or they've underquoted, and you follow the agent's price guide right through to the auction and turn up to the auction and you bid your best price and expire above the agent's price guide but below the vendor's reserve price, you are a victim of underquoting. You are an auction bunny.
Yeah.
And the journalist from the New Zealand Herald said, how do we stop this? And I said, well, there's a couple of things. Vendors who are complicit in underquoting need to be on the hook.
Yep.
That's how you stop dummy bidding, is it wasn't just the real estate agent that got a fine. If a dummy bidder turned up to an auction, the vendor got one too.
Yeah.
So the vendor said, I'm not doing that. And then suddenly the practice ceased. So the vendor has to be on the hook in instances where they've been complicit in underquoting. The other thing is that where a property passes in for 10% more than the agent's advertised guide, it should be investigated.
Yeah.
I'm not saying a penalty should be issued in every instance, but it should be investigated. In instances where a property is not on the market, and it's obvious that it's not on the market, and you can always ask for the reserve letter, the regulator can ask for the reserve letter to be sent to them. Instances where the property is not on the market inside 10% of the agent's advertised guide should also be investigated.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying in every instance there should be a penalty to the agent or the consumer, but someone should be taking a look at it.
Yeah. Oh, look, I slightly disagree with you on the last point. I think if there is an obvious discrepancy between the guide and the reserve letter outside the range, then they should inherently be punished. But
vendors blindside real estate agents all the time. I hear you, I need to sell it, I want to sell it, make sure you've got it sold. And then they're overly aggressive as a protective measure on auction day and blindside them. So there will be isolations. The reason I love policing this issue through the mass data that they're now doing is you can always have a reason for an isolated incident, which is plausible and truth.
yeah,
But when you have 80% of your listings sell for 20% more than you've quoted the buyers for 3 years in a row,
they're not outliers anymore.
they're not outliers.
Yeah, exactly. Great topic. As I said, we've got a lot more to uncover in this space, and we'll certainly talk about this again, I have no doubts. As we wrap up today's episode then, Peter, as is customary, I'd love you to take our listeners through the auction clearance data for the week from SQM Research and how you felt this data reflects what you've seen through the week on the ground.
Thanks, Ciaran. 52.6% clearance rate for the week out of 775 auctions. 225 were sold under the hammer. 183 of the successes were sold prior. 35 were sold after. 205 were re-advertised for private treaty. It's on trend for what's been happening. Big difference between the Saturday clearance rate and the midweek clearance rate. I don't know if that means anything or not, but the Saturday clearance rate was 55.1%, where the midweek clearance rate was 45%. more properties clearly go to auction on a Saturday than midweek. So that's why you got a final reading at 52.6%. Look, very similar to what we've seen for the last month. Seems like the higher the price of the property, the easier it is to sell. Agents are probably still putting too much of the wrong stock to the auction market, generic apartment strata issues, very hard to sell under the auction conditions at the moment because the depth of bidders is not there. The demand is there for housing, but when you're talking about apartments with strata issues or generic apartments, there's not the depth of bidding to justify the auction process in any way, shape or form.
Yeah, certainly. I think pretty much line ball figures really from the week before. Even the number of scheduled is about the same. Clearance rate about the same. So holding as you expected, and we're moving toward the end of winter, so we expect those numbers will, at least the volumes will rise. But interesting to see if the clearance rate holds as the stock comes.
That's right. You've got two interesting dynamics for the market now. So you're very vanilla trend that has been continuing for the last 4 to 5 weeks, but from this point on, you've got lower mortgage rates. Or, cheaper coming. Banks will move reasonably quickly. So you've got lower mortgage rates and you've got high stock levels.
Yeah.
So buyers that are saying, I'm waiting to spring for the stock, we're saying, yep, you can do that. Keep in mind that mortgage rates will be lower by then. So that'll play out the way it plays out. And vendors who are saying they're cutting interest rates, so property prices will go up. We're saying, yes, they have cut interest rates now, but stock levels are going up. And we don't pretend to know how it all truly plays out. That's why we track the market wrap each week, Ciaran, because when there's a clear trend line as there've been, there's not much to discuss. But what happens from this point with two big factors, higher stock and lower mortgage rates, it will be interesting.
Yeah, it certainly will. Well, look, really great chat today, Peter, especially the topic around underquoting. I think we are going to be spending quite a bit of time on over the next 12 months. As always, I really appreciate you coming in and sharing your knowledge with our listeners.
Thanks, Ciaran. All the best.
All the best, and thanks to everyone for listening to Current Market Insights. We look forward to speaking with you next time.
Thanks for joining us on the Current Market Insights podcast, brought to you by Harris Partners Real Estate, the podcast providing real estate insights you won't find anywhere else.